Let's be honest. Most of us trust God selectively. We trust Him with the parts of our life that feel safe. We trust Him when the bank account is full, the door opens, the prayer gets answered, the relationship feels secure. But what about when it doesn't? What about when He says, wait? Or even worse, when He says, no? What happens when trusting God means letting go of everything you thought you needed? What happens when it means stepping out on water? When your instincts tell you to stay in the boat? Trusting God fully is one of the most difficult yet most freeing decisions a believer can ever make. Because let's be real, most of us want peace, but we also want control. And the problem is those two don't live in the same house. Control feels safe. Control feels familiar. But control is an illusion. And the more tightly you grip it, the more anxious you become. Trusting God, on the other hand, often feels like walking blindfolded through a storm. But here's the paradox. When you finally release control, that's when real peace begins to rise. Not a fake surface level smile through the pain kind of peace, but the kind of peace that passes understanding. The kind that shows up when you should be panicking, but somehow. See, peace isn't the product of perfect circumstances. It's the product of total surrender. Peace doesn't come when everything is resolved. Peace comes when your spirit is resting in the one who never changes, even when everything else does. You can't experience God's peace while you're still trying to play God in your life. And I know that's not easy to hear, because we don't usually say we're trying to be God. But let's look at how we live. We want to plan every outcome. We want to predict every step. We want to prevent every failure. And yet we wonder why we're exhausted, anxious, and overwhelmed. Could it be that the weight we're carrying was never ours to begin with? That's why Jesus said, come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Not come to me and I'll give you control. Not come to me and I'll explain everything. Just come to me and I'll give you rest. Trust is the doorway to that rest. Trust means I don't need to know how. It's enough to know who. Trust means I release the outcome and take the next obedient step. And that is where peace lives. In the space between your surrender and God's sovereignty. When you hold on to control, you live in constant tension. You pray, but you're still panicking. You say, God, I trust you, but you're still trying to manipulate the situation to your advantage. It's exhausting. And yet we do it because we've convinced ourselves that if we don't control it, everything will fall apart. But what if that's the lie that's holding you back from the life God actually wants to lead you into? What if real peace isn't on the other side of control, but on the other side of surrender? God isn't asking you to stop caring. He's not asking you to be passive. He's asking you to trust Him with the things you can't control. And let's be honest, that's most things. You can't control the economy. You can't control other people's decisions. You can't control the timing of your breakthrough, but you can control your response. You can control your perspective. You can choose to place those things into God's hands and say, I trust you more than I trust my own plan. And when you do that, something starts to shift. You begin to experience peace, not because the situation changed, but because your spirit did. The storm may still be raging on the outside, but inside you've anchored yourself to a truth deeper than the waves. That's what happens when you trust God fully. You stop needing all the answers. You stop reacting to every change. You start living from a place of rest. Not resignation, but wholly confident. You're no longer driven by fear of what could go wrong, but led by faith in the one who's always right. Peace doesn't mean you'll never feel anxious again. It means anxiety doesn't get to have the final word. Peace doesn't mean the road will be smooth. It means you won't walk it alone. And that's the beauty of trusting God fully. You begin to realize that the thing you thought you were giving up was never really yours to hold in the first place. Control was a weight you were never built to carry. Trust is the freedom your soul was created for. When you let go of trying to manage every detail, you open the door for God to do what only He can do, not just around you, but within you. Because while control tries to protect you, trust transforms you. Surrender isn't weakness, it's worship. It's not giving up, it's giving over. And that's the exact space where God moves the most powerfully, not when you're striving in your own strength, not when you've figured out all the angles, but when you lay it all down. See, God doesn't need your performance, He wants your permission. Not because He's limited by your ability, but because He honors your willingness. The most powerful moments in your life won't come when you've mastered the situation. They'll come when you finally say, God, I can't, but you can. We think God shows up in the spotlight, but He often moves in the shadows of surrender. It's in the places where you feel unseen, undone, and unsure that He does His deepest work. Because surrender strips you of the illusion that you were ever in control to begin with. It takes you out of the driver's seat and puts you in the passenger seat. Not asleep, not passive, but dependent. And in that dependence, you learn something about God that you can't learn in comfort. That His strength is made perfect in your weakness. You don't experience the fullness of God's power by holding everything together. You experience it by letting go of what's no longer yours to carry, the plans you tried to force, the timelines you stressed over, the outcomes you tried to predict. God doesn't bless control, He blesses surrender. And surrender isn't a one-time event. It's a daily choice. Every morning you wake up and decide, am I going to run this on my own? Or am I going to trust the one who knows the end from the beginning? Look at the people God used most powerfully in Scripture. Moses had to surrender his identity before he could lead a nation. David had to surrender his comfort before he could become king. Mary had to surrender her reputation to carry the promise. And Jesus surrendered His will in the garden so He could fulfill His purpose on the cross. Every major move of God begins with a moment of surrender. It's not glamorous, it's not easy, but it's holy. Surrender isn't about understanding everything. It's about trusting the one who does. It's that moment when you say, God, even if it doesn't happen how I imagined, even if it costs me something, I still choose your will over mine. That's where power flows. Not from your plans, but from your posture, because God resists the proud, but gives grace to the humble. And surrender is the ultimate act of humility. It's saying, God, I don't just need you to bless my path. I want you to be my path. What you call a breaking point, God may be calling a breakthrough. But you won't see it until you stop trying to hold all the pieces. Sometimes the reason you haven't seen the miracle yet is because your hands are too full of your own agenda. But when you surrender, when you let go, you make space for God to move. You open the door to supernatural provision, protection, and direction. Not because you earned it, but because you trusted Him enough to release it. And here's what's wild. When you surrender, God doesn't just give back what you let go. He multiplies it. He redeems it. He resurrects it. The dreams you thought were dead, the purpose you thought you missed, the places you thought were too broken. God specializes in using surrendered lives to do the impossible. But He won't force His way in. He waits for you to open the door. Not because He needs your help, but because He values your heart. Surrender takes courage. It's not passive. It's powerful. It means choosing faith over fear, obedience over outcome, and presence over performance. It's saying, God, I don't know what's next, but I know You're already there. And when you start living like that, everything changes. Your anxiety begins to lift, your striving starts to fade, and your soul comes into alignment with the one who never fails. That's when God does what only He can do, not because you figured it out, but because you finally laid it down. So often we think our strength impresses God, but He's not moved by your hustle. He's moved by your heart. He's not waiting for you to prove something. He's waiting for you to release something. That fear you've been holding, that expectation you've been carrying, that guilt, that shame, that pressure to be perfect, none of that is required. What He's asking for is simple. Will you trust me enough to surrender? Because the moment you do, you'll find out His power was never limited by your weakness. It was waiting for your yes. Obedience is not about understanding every detail. It's about trusting the one who does. It's about saying yes, even when it doesn't make sense, even when there's no visible reward, even when the road ahead is unclear. See, there are some outcomes in your life that will never be accessed by strategy alone. You can't plan your way into every blessing. You can't network your way into every opportunity. Some things only come through obedience, radical, faithful obedience that says, God, I'm going, even when I don't see how this ends. The truth is, we like to be in control. We like predictability. We like progress we can measure and results we can explain. But God's economy doesn't operate like that. God blesses obedience, not convenience. When you obey, even when it's hard, even when it costs you something, even when it disrupts your plan, you position yourself under the favor of God in ways you couldn't earn, even on your best day. Because obedience always puts you in alignment with purpose. Take Abraham, for example. God told him to leave everything familiar, his land, his family, his safety net, and go to a place that hadn't even been revealed yet. That's obedience. He didn't have a GPS. He didn't have a 5-year plan. He had a word. And when you have a word from God, that's enough. Because God's word carries outcomes that are far greater than what your mind can manufacture. There are doors that only open when your feet move in obedience. There are blessings that are unlocked not through talent, but through trust. We think outcomes are tied to effort, and yes, effort matters. But obedience activates what effort alone never could. It invites the supernatural into the situation. When you obey, you create a space for God to show up in a way that reminds everyone, including yourself, that He's the one in control. And sometimes obedience doesn't look like something big. Sometimes it's small. It's forgiving when you'd rather be bitter. It's serving when no one says thank you. It's giving when you feel like holding back. It's staying faithful when it would be easier to quit. These are not glamorous moves, but they are powerful. Because when you obey in the small, God prepares you for the big. He watches how you handle the unseen before He releases the spotlight. He tests your faithfulness in the quiet before He amplifies your influence in public. Obedience always costs something up front, but what it unlocks in return is always greater. That's the mystery of it. It's the hidden math of the kingdom. You give up one thing and somehow gain something infinitely better. Peace, clarity, purpose, provision. But here's the tension. You don't always see the reward right away. Sometimes obedience leads you into places that feel harder before they feel holy. Sometimes it brings you into a wilderness before it brings you into a promise. But that doesn't mean it's not working. It means God is working something deeper in you before He releases something greater through you. We've been taught to chase outcomes, to build platforms, to generate growth. But what if the next level of your life isn't something you can create, but something you must receive through obedience? What if your job isn't to manufacture the future, but to follow the voice of the shepherd step by step? Obedience isn't about seeing the full picture. It's about trusting the painter. And the brushstrokes don't always make sense up close, but over time they reveal a masterpiece you never could have orchestrated on your own. Think about Peter on the boat. Jesus tells him to cast his net one more time. Peter could have argued. He could have said, I've done this all night and it didn't work. But instead he said, nevertheless, at your word, I'll do it again. And the result? A catch so large, the nets begin to break. That's what obedience does. It creates overflow. Not just for you. Your obedience doesn't just bless your life. It blesses your household, your relationships, your calling. Obedience is the bridge between your current situation and your future destiny. It's the seed you plant that grows into a harvest you could never have imagined. And while it may not feel glamorous, it's always sacred because it means you've chosen to trust God's direction more than your own desires. And that decision will always take you places your effort never could. The outcomes you've been praying for, fighting for, striving for, some of them are already written in heaven, but they're waiting on one thing, your obedience. Full trust isn't built in a moment. It's forged in the middle of uncertainty, refined in waiting and proven in storms. Trusting God fully doesn't mean you always feel strong. It means you choose to believe even when everything around you is shaking. And when you make that choice over and over again, day after day, something begins to happen deep inside you. Your faith becomes unshakable, not because your circumstances are easy, but because your foundation is secure. Faith that endures every season isn't a product of comfort. It's a product of full trust in a faithful God. There's a kind of faith that only grows in the soil of surrender. And full trust is what tills that soil. When you say, God, I don't understand, but I still trust you, you're not ignoring reality, you're inviting heaven into it. That's when your roots start to go deeper. That's when your confidence begins to shift from what you can see to who you know. Trusting God doesn't mean you won't feel fear, disappointment, or confusion. It means those feelings don't have the final say. Trust anchors you to a truth that stands firm no matter what season you're walking through. Every season tests something different in your faith. In times of abundance, the test is, will I still trust God more than I trust my blessings? In times of lack, it's, do I believe He's still my provider? In waiting, it's, do I believe He's working even when I don't see anything changing? Full trust isn't seasonal, it's a posture. It's choosing to believe that God is who He says He is, regardless of how you feel or what. And when that becomes your default position, your faith stops rising and falling with your emotions. Look at the lives of people in Scripture who had unshakable faith. It wasn't because life was easy for them. It's because they trusted God through every season. Joseph trusted God in the pit, in the prison, and in the palace. Ruth trusted God when everything familiar was taken away. Paul trusted God while shipwrecked, imprisoned, and beaten. Their faith didn't waver because they knew the one who called them was faithful, and that same God is writing your story too. He's not just the God of mountaintops. He's the God of valleys. He's not just the God of breakthroughs. He's the God who holds you when the answer hasn't come yet. Faith that's rooted in full trust looks different. It doesn't panic at closed doors. It doesn't get discouraged by delays. It doesn't crumble when things don't go according to plan. That kind of faith says, if He said it, He'll do it. If He promised it, He'll fulfill it. If He's allowed it, He'll use it. That kind of faith doesn't require immediate results to remain strong, because it knows that God's timing isn't a denial, it's divine preparation. But here's the thing. Full trust doesn't grow in isolation. It grows in relationship. The more you walk with God, the more you see His character. And the more you know His character, the easier it becomes to trust Him. When you realize that He's been faithful in every season of your past, it gives you courage to trust Him with whatever season you're in right now. Full trust is less about having all the answers and more about knowing the one who does. It's less about certainty in outcomes and more about confidence in His presence. Sometimes we treat faith like a switch, on or off, strong or weak. But faith is more like a muscle, and trust is what strengthens it. Every time you choose to trust God instead of reacting in fear, your faith gets stronger. Every time you choose to believe His word over your worry, your faith gets deeper. Every season is an opportunity to train your trust to let it stretch, grow, and solidify. Because there's a kind of faith God is building in you that won't just help you survive this season, it will carry you through every one that comes after. Full trust is not just about what you believe, it's about who you believe in. It's about knowing that even when life feels unstable, your God is unshakable. It's about choosing to plant your feet on His promises when everything around you feels like shifting sand. It's about walking through fire and still believing that He is good.